thank you for coming. Welcome to the Marion City School Board Education meeting for this March 4th, 2019. Do a few things differently this evening. So normally at this time we would have a roll call, and in lieu of a roll call, I'm going to introduce each of the board members, and the treasurer, Mrs. Reinhardt, can write their names down. But first, before we do any of that, we're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance. If you all stand, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce to you Leslie Snyder as Vice President of the Board, and Steve Williams, member of the board, Mike McQuarrie, member of the board, and Gary Imes is also a member of the board, but he is on vacation this week, so he could not be here tonight. And I'm Ted McInnes, serving this year as president of the board. So that'll serve as our roll call. And I just want to tell you a little bit about why we're here tonight rather than at our usual location at Grant Middle School for our board meetings. The board meets on the first and third Mondays of each month at 6 p.m. at Grant Middle School. School is our normal location. But the board this year decided that we would like to devote one of those meetings each month to have a public forum or a way for teachers and staff members, members of the public, parents, and others to just have an opportunity to talk with the board in some kind of a forum where we can get input. Because I think as a board of education, we're elected officials, and we recognize that Marion City Schools is an important member of this community at large, and that our motto is to inspire a community of achievement. And we take that seriously because we have over 4,000 students, hundreds of staff members that are members of this community. I know you all look to us to educate children in the best possible way we can so that they become future leaders and members of this community and the workforce. And so we take that responsibility very, very serious, and we want you to know that. But we can't do that alone. We need the input of public members, staff members, folks like you to come to these kinds of meetings and help us to address the serious nature of what we do each and every day in the schools. And we have a great staff. We have great administrators, and we think we try very hard to provide a lot of wraparound services to kids. And we know that we have a lot of barriers in this community to education, and we try to each and every day to overcome those barriers to provide the best education we can. So with that, tonight we're going to devote this evening to introducing our superintendent, Dr. Ron Iarussi, who will give a State of the City School address and the state of the city schools. But we will also have an opportunity for you to have questions at the end of his presentation, and I think he'll invite you to ask questions during his presentation, and then we'll all stick around for afterwards. If you don't want to ask a question in front of everyone, we'll be here individually to talk with you as you like. Point out, feel free to get coffee, cookies, and water over there anytime during the presentation that you would like to do so. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Dr. Iarussi.
Thank you, Ted. Ted gave half of my speech tonight already, so we're good to go. I'm just teasing. Thanks. I'm going to move out this way because, as most kids do when they come into school, they kind of tend to sit towards the back, and so I have a wireless mic so I can come out here. And the reason I'm doing this today is because I want to make this as interactive as possible. So as we go through these slides and we talk about different aspects in the state of the city schools, if you have a question or you need further clarification, please just raise your hand and I'd be more than happy to open up a discussion or clarify anything that we have here. On the agenda tonight, there are probably 4 main topics that I'd like to cover. 1 is enrollment, 2 is the facilities, 3 is academics, and then our treasurer, Veronica Reinhardt, will talk a little bit about the fiscal situation of the schools. But again, as we go through these, feel free to stop and ask any questions. So typically in a State of the Schools address, you give a statement that really tells you what the state of the organization you're talking about actually is. I got to admit, I borrowed this from the mayor. I don't know if you heard the mayor's State of the City address, but his state of Marion City was, we are heading in the right direction. And so I took a look at that, and I thought about that for a while, and I thought, we, right now in Marion City Schools, we're about growth. That's the topic of discussion. That's what we're having conversations with our staff about is, where are we at currently, but what are we going to do to grow the city schools? And so in all aspects that I'm going to talk about, we're going to focus on growth. Just a little bit, many of you know our administrative leadership team. Jen Lawson, our assistant superintendent, all these folks are here tonight. Ben Porter, director of teaching and learning. Kelly Barber is our director of student services. And Adam Kunkel is our director of operations and human resources. Sorry. As Mr. McKinley already said, he introduced the board members, and he gave us a little saying here, which he said, the Board of Education is dedicated to ensuring that every child in our community has the opportunity to grow and achieve their fullest potential. Talked about the topics that we're going to cover tonight, again, enrollment, facilities, academics, and finances. So this, I hope everybody can see this. If you could kind of pay particular attention to, this is our enrollment currently in Marion City Schools, and it's broken down by grade level. And if you look here on the left, if you look at pre-K, kind of pre-K is a little bit different, but if you look at kindergarten through 6th grade, and if you notice, most of those numbers in our earlier grades are over 350 and sometimes even approaching 400. And the significance of that is, too, if you look on the right-hand side, then many of our numbers in grade 7 through grade 12 are in either the low 3s or the high 2s. And that's pretty significant for us. If you think about the facilities that we have and the incoming students that are entering in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, as opposed to the number of students that are leaving. So if you look at the next 4 or 5 years, if that trend continues in kindergarten where we have 410 students, we're going to grow at a very rapid rate. And so we have to plan for the future. Part of what we're going to be talking about tonight in the State of the Schools is how exactly do we plan for this? We know that our facilities, and some of them are more limited in size than others, and that we currently have some issues and space requirements that we have at our elementaries. And so we're going to have serious conversations about what this is going to look, what Marion City Schools will look like in the future based on this trend. So again, I think it's really important to take note here that, growth is a good thing. We know that our enrollment is actually growing. From last year to this year, we actually had 160 more resident students in Marion City. So that means the population of people who are coming to Marion are bringing families with them, and we have an additional 160 students. That's not, any students that came back from open enrollment or anything like that. Those are additional resident students. So again, if that trend continues, then we have to have a strategic plan in place to accommodate the needs of that. So total number of students we have in Marion right now is 4,500. And that's what 4,586, that's the students who come to school and attend school in Marion City. I think this is another important slide to take a look at. These are the numbers of open enrollment students that come into Marion City Schools, as well as the number of students that leave Marion City Schools, either on open enrollment to some of the surrounding districts or attend another school choice opportunity, some charter schools and other community schools that exist around the area. So that's all a significant number. So the number of students that are coming into Marion City Schools is 362, but the number of students going out is well over 1,200. So we have a lot of students that live in Marion City Schools that do not choose to come to Marion City Schools. And so that is another issue that needs to be addressed as far as, what is it and why do those students leave? And there can be various reasons. And I know that the district has done some surveying and had some conversations with parents of students who leave, and they could be leaving because, they have grandparents in another school district, they might work in another school district, or they just feel like that's a better fit for their children. But we have to start gathering this kind of information and talking about why so many students leave Marion City Schools. The other significant piece of that, if you think about this, for 1,200 students that leave Marion City Schools, I'm sure you're aware that they just don't leave and go to another school district without some kind of financial backing to allow them to do that. So for every child that leaves Marion City Schools, at least $6,000 per student leaves with that child. So if you think about that in relation to our budget, that's a huge piece of expenses, and Veronica will talk about this a little bit later because it's listed on our expense sheet. We actually have to pay that money out to those districts, those open enrollment districts and community schools in which our students attend. So again, that's a very significant number, and we have to have a good strategic plan that includes how are we going to keep our resident students here in Marion City, and why is it that they are leaving and going to another school. The next couple slides I thought we'd just talk a little bit, and maybe you're not that familiar because you may live on one side of town and you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at some of our elementary buildings and know a little bit more about each and every building that we have. So this is Garfield, and again, talking about enrollment, so we have 422 students in pre-K through 5th grade. Leanne Childers is a brand new principal there at Garfield this year, and their local report card for that particular school is a grade of a C. And her quote is, "Garfield staff and students are working hard to improve our reading, writing, and math skills every day. We're focused on getting better. We're focused on growing." George Washington Elementary, and you could see, as you could take a look at our buildings, you could see that the enrollment in most of our buildings is fairly similar. And again, so 441 students. George Washington Elementary also had a C on their report card, and I know that Scott Curtis is really excited about the fact that George Washington was a what's called a focus school. So the Ohio Department of Education, when schools, when their report cards aren't very good and their test scores aren't very good, then they classify them as what's called a school of focus. And so now you're required to do some things to ensure that academics are being addressed to raise those test scores, and they were able to get out of being a school of focus this year. And so that staff at GW, along with Scott, has worked very hard to do that. Harrison, again, 496 students, one of our larger elementaries with a report card grade of D. And the comment from Leah Affiliator, the principal there, is Harrison staff has developed measurable goals and action steps to work on 3 specific areas. They have a strategic plan in place to improve culture, improve academics, and build leadership within their students. Hayes Elementary, again, 267 students. This is one of our smaller buildings in the district. And they did also receive a letter grade of C on their report card. Hayes is another one of the schools that was a focus school that's worked very hard and got their letter grade up to a C. And so they are no longer an OD school of focus. And they're working diligently right now to use pre and post assessments and data to monitor student achievement. McKinley, again, another one of our elementary buildings with a total of about 431 students. Again, much like the other buildings in the district, another building that has received a C on their report card. McKinley principal Matt Holsinger is proud of the fact that they've moved the needle and gap closing by receiving an A in that specific category on the report card. And that's a pretty significant grade. Gap closing is about taking subgroups that are within your building and making sure that everybody has an achievement level that is similar, so that you don't have one group of students, say, for example, our economically disadvantaged population, that is underperforming the rest of the school. And so McKinley has done a really good job with their subgroups of getting them, and they actually got an A in that category. They've also improved in the area of progress. Progress is an indicator on the local report card that measures growth. And so all of our buildings are working really hard to make sure that they sustain and improve in the growth area, and McKinley is one of those buildings that's done a really good job with that. McKinley will continue to grow by using the OIP process to help guide their teacher-based teams for the next school year. And I'll talk a little bit about the OIP process in a minute here. Taft Elementary, again, 434 students received the report card grade of D. Taft, our goal is to build a solid foundations for students to be successful in school and life one step at a time. We've been building our steps through TBT and BLT meetings. Through the use of data, we're identifying and tackling the needs during our meeting times, which will ultimately improve scores. That's our elementary buildings. Grant Middle School, so a total in grades 6 through 8 of 889 students with a report card grade of C. And Mr. Ballinger is here tonight, and for the first time in 4 years, Grant Middle School is no longer a school of focus due to the increase in gap closure, again, closing the gap on those subgroups in math and in language arts. In the high school, grades 9 through 12, there are a total of 1,206 students here at the high school, and they received a report card grade of D. Principal Jennifer Musbach-Wellman is quoted as saying, "This is a place for success. At Harding High School, we're excited to celebrate Diploma Plus acceptance with the class of 2019 as students are earning credentials and points towards graduation." So that's each individual, some information on attendance and enrollment at each individual building. This is kind of an overall metric of what we look like within our buildings as far as our report card grades. So again, you could see those areas. Achievement, that column is specifically related to test scores. So whether or not each building has, for example, if there's our elementary buildings have 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade math and language arts tests and science tests, then the number of students who achieve the proficient level is related to the overall, or the achievement score. So that specifically is related to test scores. Progress is about growth. And so the state is able to take each individual child, measure where they came into that classroom or that school building or that grade level at the beginning of the year, and measure how much they've grown by the end of the year. And again, to us, right now, that is a very, very important indicator, because we need to be able to, on a yearly basis, show growth at every grade level. And so we're trying to focus on making sure that we meet the needs of every single child that comes in each and every classroom, and how can we take that child from point A to point B and make sure that every child grows. Graduation or gap closing, I explained already, is in relation to the subgroups. The graduation rate obviously is only pertains really to the high school. Those improving at-risk K through 3, that goes along with the 3rd grade reading guarantee, and you can see where we're at in relation to the 3rd grade reading guarantee. And the prepared for success indicator is only a high school indicator. And I'm going to talk just for a second about prepared for success. Credit the high school staff this year worked really hard on improving this indicator. So the Prepared for Success indicator measures graduates, the seniors that graduate, and whether they received an ACT remediation free score, which is a 22. So a cumulative score of 22 on the ACT for that student would be that they met the indicator. If a student gets an honors diploma, which actually includes an ACT high score, along with some honors classes and their passage rate, that would also be a student that would meet the indicator. And the last one is if a student can gain 12 points worth of industry credentials, then they would be qualified for this part of the indicator. And what the high school did a really good job of this year, when we entered into this year with the graduation requirements that the way they existed when we entered the year, many of our students, probably 60-some% of our current high school seniors, were at risk of not graduating. By December, the work that they put into allowing students the opportunity to gain some industry credentials and work on another assessment called the Work Keys, which was part of an alternative graduation pathway. By the time December rolled around, we went from having 60% of our kids at risk of not graduating to 90% of our kids that were on track to graduate. And the good thing about this part is this idea of giving students the opportunity to gain an industry credential is somewhat new. But for many of our students, if you look at the statistics of our graduates and what happens to them, right now in our graduates, less than 20% of our students go on to college. We had about 20% of our students that go and get a job, and we actually had about 60% of our students that were what we considered disengaged, that really didn't have an idea what they were doing. And so this idea of giving students the opportunity to have an industry credential gives them an additional tool that they can put in their toolbox when they graduate. So an industry credential, so to speak, I'll give you an example of one. We have an industry credential that is geared towards retail marketing. And so it gives some students some opportunities to study what retail marketing is all about. They go in and they do some assessments, and they go through some programming, and they can leave with an industry credential that says they've got some additional training in retail marketing. That's just one of the industry credentials. So now when our students leave, and let's just say they're not ready to go to college, then they have something that they can take with them that they possibly can give them an opportunity to get a job. Or if they do go to college and they need to support themselves, because that's what happens to many of our students, and part of the largest reason that they do drop out of school is they can't afford it. Our students tell us that they go to college, and even though they get grants and tuition to be able to do that, they still have to support themselves. They still have to buy gas. They still have to buy food. And they struggle with that. And so many of our students have to get a job. And so now we're trying to go to school and get a job and work at the same time. And anybody in here who's done that knows how difficult that is. And so again, this is another tool that I think that we're giving our graduates in Marion that can help them be successful. So if college doesn't work out for them, then they have a safety net with the idea of having an industry credential that they may be able to go get a job for. So again, that's the Prepared for Success indicator, even though we got an F, and that indicator goes back a whole year. So this year we're going to see marked improvement in the Prepared for Success indicator. And again, if you have any questions along the way, please stop me. All right, so I talked about enrollment, and I think it was important to kind of lay out the enrollment across the districts and what our elementary buildings look like, so we can talk a little bit about facilities. Obviously, you see that how we are growing at the elementary level, and I'll use Harrison as an example this year. That we had a large amount of students that come to Harrison. They're not just resident students, open enrollment students that come from outside the district, and intra-district students that attend Harrison who live in other parts of the city schools in a different buildings district. And so we had an issue this year with space. We had room, which every room at Harrison is utilized. We actually have art and music that we try to fit in and put some things on a cart to try to make sure that we can still deliver art and music, but still provide the classroom space that's necessary to house certain grade levels, which isn't the best situation. But because we were limited in space this year, our kindergarten numbers at Harrison grew to 28, 29. I think that's probably where we're at right now. So we have 3 kindergarten units at Harrison that have either 28 or 29 students. So that's not the best situation. But those teachers and everybody at Harrison, they didn't want to turn students away who wanted to come to Harrison without having additional space, so we did that. And so we had to make some adjustments to our educational program there to allow for some more support for those teachers who have 28 and 29 students in a kindergarten. And if you have ever been into a kindergarten classroom, if you could imagine, 20 is a number that's really, is difficult to manage, manageable, but think about 10 more students in each one of those classrooms. So credit those teachers over there at Harrison for the job that they're doing with that. But we have to fix that problem. We can't allow that to happen. And so if we want to maintain this idea of growth and provide opportunities for students who want to be in Marion City, then we have to restructure and we have to organize our schools so that we can allow that to happen. I think we turned away 19 students this year that wanted to come in on open enrollment. So an additional 19 students would have attended Harrison had we had the space to do so. And think about that in relation to revenue. It's not about revenue, but again, remember I said the $6,000 that leaves with students, we also get at least $6,000 for every student that comes into Marion. Okay, so we definitely know we have lack of space. One of the other issues in relation to our facilities is that at Grant Middle School, as you well know, that's where the central offices are located. And we've done some studies on the safety of our buildings. And one of the issues that we have at Grant with the offices being upstairs is we can't really track where people come into the building. Once they come in and get buzzed in, we have a great Raptor system that identifies if anybody has some issues that we might not want to allow in our buildings. But once they get in that building, okay, we don't really have too much control other than some of the cameras that we have. So the central office being at Grant is somewhat of a safety issue. And then, you know, if you look at the size of our buildings, the high school has, right now we have 1,200 students. I think this building was built with the idea that we might have 1,800 to 2,000 at one point, is when they, thanks Mike, Mike says 2. So this building was built with the idea that we could house 2,000 students here. So there's plenty of room here at the high school. And so we probably haven't taken into account the efficiency of where our students are at within the school district as well. So we have a lot more space at the high school. And obviously we know that, you know, some of the elementary buildings that we, you know, because of what they've grown, we have to make more space in there. So I say all this to talk about, these are some of the things that we need to consider in the future. We need to take a look at moving the central offices out of Grant so that we can centralize the district service center, that we can make that as safe a building as possible, but we can be more efficient. Right now with the district central office staff, some of them are located at the Welcome Center, some of them are located here at Harding, some of them are located at Grant. And so that presents problems for us in the way of efficiency too. So the idea of looking at some space that might be able to house the district service center is definitely in the mix. We need to talk about reorganization here. Okay, and again, when I went back and talked about the space that's available at the high school, the lack of space that's available at the elementaries, over the next year, we're going to be having discussions within the community about what that might look like. So the possibility of allowing some more students to attend Harding because of all the space we have has to be part of the conversation. So if we were looking at 8th grade, for example, and where they're currently housed and where we might be able to house them more efficiently here, that's got to, again, be part of that conversation. And so if that opens up some space at Grant Middle School, which allows us to reorganize, we have to look at that too, to allow more space to accommodate the increased enrollment at the elementary building. So, and those are difficult, sometimes difficult conversations to have when you're going through a reorganization of a district. And everybody has kind of their feelings about that, and everybody has their concerns about that. And so I can tell you that there's no plans made as of yet, but if we look at this enrollment trend and it continues to go that way, I think for the following year after that and the years to come, that has to be part of the conversation. Many of you are familiar with the alternative program that we had out at Tri-Rivers. The Rushmore Academy is no longer the Rushmore Academy. And Tri-Rivers, we no longer have that space available for us at Tri-Rivers. I don't think there's anybody in the district that hadn't seen the value of having that alternative program and what it provided for our students. Marion City Schools needs to have an alternative program for our students. And we need to look at space to be able to do that. You may or may not have heard that we have looked at Colonial Acres, which was ironically the original home for the Rushmore Academy. We have looked at a lot of different space within the community. We have some career tech equipment that is currently located at Tri-Rivers that we own, that was part of the Rushmore Academy, that we would like to continue to utilize in our alternative program. I think the opportunity for those students that go through that alternative program to get some career tech skills like in welding or automotive repair or building construction gives them more hope, and they see a light at the end of the tunnel, and they're more willing to take that education and do something with it. And so we are in the process of looking for space, and Colonial Acres is under evaluation right now to see what it would take to put that building back into the mix. And that would be to house an alternative program there. Preschool. It's evident to us that the more of our students that attend preschool, the better they do in the areas of math and literacy when they enter kindergarten. And so we have enough data to support that. So we need to do everything we can within the district to make sure we have every kid have an opportunity who's eligible to attend a preschool here. And so that's also part of the conversations is where do we look at either a centralized preschool or, expanding the current offerings that we do have with preschool. I know currently many of our buildings have preschool, but again, those preschool classrooms take up space. And so if we have the opportunity to centralize those two, there's another area that we can open up some space in the elementary buildings. Okay, let me talk just a little bit more about academics. Many of you probably have taken a look at our report card and the measures that are used to evaluate districts. And so let me say a couple things before I switch slides here about our local report cards. I don't think it's any secret that Marion City Schools has struggled over the years, especially with the area of achievement and passing tests. Okay, our end of course exams and our state tests, the results haven't been good for probably the last 4 years. And so we keep continually talking about, all right, so how do we get from a place where, less than 50% of our kids in language arts can pass the state tests to a point where we can get close to that 80%, which is what the indicator requires. Well, we're not going to change that overnight. We're not going to wake up tomorrow and we're going to hit 80%. And we know that. And so we're going to continue to work on, how we can make improvements to what we're doing in the classroom. And then our focus, again, as I said, is on growth. So if we can continue to grow, so if we're at 45% in third grade reading guarantee this year, if we can get to 55% next year, and then we can continue to grow and get to 60%, and we can look at it throughout a long-term plan to get to that point, that's the way we need to go about doing it. And so some of these report card grades and some of these things don't look very good, but the important thing is where do we go from here? So we have enough baseline data to tell us these are the district grades, and I went through the grades, but these are grades as a whole for the district. We went by building, so this is our district report card. So our overall grade is a D, and we have D's in achievement, progress, gap closing, improving at-risk readers, a C in our graduation rate, and an F in our prepared for success indicator. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what's happening in the state of Ohio with House Bill 70, but I think that's an important part of the conversation, not to put the fear of God in anybody, but it is a reality in the situation we face in Ohio that if a school district receives an F as an overall grade for 2 years in a row, that they are eligible to become a House Bill 70 district. What House Bill 70 does is it basically disbands the Board of Education in that district. The state takes it over and places a CEO in the district to make improvements. We're not far away from that. And so I say that not to scare anybody, but just the reality of the situation. These are some of our test scores. So in 3rd and 4th grade in language arts and math, you can see where we're at in the 40s. In the 5th and 6th grade, again, language arts in the 5th grade at the 50s, still below 50 in math and below 50 in science, 42% in language arts in 6th grade, 53% in math. 7th grade, language arts and math, and then language arts. And that English language arts in 8th grade really looks dismal when you look at that, but there's a story behind that, and sometimes you have to look into the data a little bit further. We have many of our students in 8th grade that are taking advantage of high school credit English. And so those students that leave and take high school credit English are not responsible for taking the 8th grade and state test. So they take the high school end of course exam. And so you've taken probably some of your best students who are taking high school English, and then so the populations that's left are the ones that take the 8th grade state test. And so that's why that looks that low. Some of our high school scores, and you can see we've had lots of conversations with our government teachers because we're very close, only 7 points away from that 80% in U.S. government. And so having conversations with them about, some strategies that they're using and making sure that we, get that information out to the rest of our content areas. So, we have all of these issues that we talked a little bit about today in enrollment and facilities and academics. So where do we go from here and what do we do about it? So last month, on the first meeting of the month, I took some time to talk a little bit about what our strategic plan process will look like. And so that's, to me, the key, that we have to have a good plan in place that is measurable, that we can take a look at on a yearly basis to see what improvements we made in relation to that plan, and then what do we need to go back and change and fix to continue to grow and get better. I think that the district has had a strategic plan in place. Ted referred to the mission, which was established, and some of the vision of where Marion City Schools want to go. And we had established 4 pillars within the district. And they were, the 4 pillars that were established were certain areas that they wanted to focus on to make improvements. A couple of months ago, I talked about the idea of maybe taking a look at these pillars again and doing some refocusing of some of these pillars. So, for example, the literacy pillar that existed in the previous strategic plan was primarily based around a program called Literacy Collaborative. And so it mainly was an elementary through middle school program for literacy instruction that mainly Ohio State is responsible for providing the professional development in that program. Well, what we've seen over the last 4 years is we have not been able to really measure whether or not that specific program has been effective. So we have not had, and we have not seen a lot of improvements within that pillar in relation to what Literacy Collaborative has provided for us. So through our discussions, and what we need to take a look at is, because Literacy Collaborative doesn't talk about what happens from birth through 5 years old, and doesn't really talk a lot about what happens at the later middle school and high school years, we need to take this pillar and refocus it just on literacy. Because in order to improve those literacy scores, we have to address the birth through 5 component. We have to continue to work with Let's Read 20 and those kinds of organizations to make sure that the community understands their role in helping us improve literacy achievement. And so to refocus that pillar the idea would be to have a committee put together that would address all the needs of literacy. So we need folks and stakeholders that are responsible for helping us provide support for those children when they're born up until they get to us in 5th grade, which includes Head Start and preschool and some of those other organizations that help us prepare students for kindergarten. And then we also obviously have to have teachers and staff members that are both directly involved in literacy instruction as well as other content areas to impress upon our students how important it is for them to read and how necessary it is for us to at least get our students to read at grade level. And so that would be part of a strategic plan that would refocus the current strategic plan. And we'll visit each one of the pillars again and make sure that we have measurable goals with community and stakeholder input into each one of those pillars and a progress monitoring plan so that we can continue to see where we're at and continue to make adjustments as we move forward. In Marion City Schools, we use the Ohio Improvement Process, and that is our change process here. And it's based on 5 steps, and they're very simple, and we'll do this in relation to our strategic plan. Number 1 is you have to collect enough data so that you can identify what your critical needs are. And obviously, if you took a look at some of the data today, that's part of what we're doing. We're looking at enrollment, we're looking at academics, we're looking at our facilities. Veronica's going to be looking at the financial aspect, but we have to identify and focus in on those critical needs. We know that we can't change every single situation overnight, but we have to attack the areas that we can attack and see what our priorities are and our most pressing needs. The second part of that is to go find strategies that work. So we're not going to just come up with strategies on our own to address some of the needs. We are going to look at research-based and evidence-based strategies that have been successful in districts like ours that we can go visit, talk to people, get professional development, and bring those kinds of situations here in Marion. The third part of that is a plan for implementation. So whatever action steps that we do come out of our strategic plan has to have a plan for implementation. We have to actually go ahead and implement that and develop a system for monitoring that on a regular basis. And then probably the most important step in this process is number 5. It's to examine and adjust. So on a continual basis, find out what improvements we're making, what's working, what's not working, and adjust accordingly. One of the issues that I talked about was the literacy pillar. Here's some specifics about what we're currently working on in literacy to address the needs of our students and help improve achievement in the area of literacy. We put together a district literacy committee. Right now that committee has been broken down into grade band areas, and we've been having a lot of discussion with teachers about what we're currently doing in those grade band areas. We've sought out some experts. The Ohio Department of Education has really focused this year and put together kind of a strategic plan for improving literacy across the state of Ohio. We were fortunate enough to have ODE's literacy specialist who's dedicated to that. Her name's Melissa Mayer, came out to our district, spent about 4 hours with our administrators and our core literacy team talking about, what does the best research show us about why kids read, why they don't read, what are we missing in our program that we need to take a look at in relation to our strengths and weaknesses. We'll utilize the state support team. Again, I talked about the idea of establishing a plan that is birthed through grade 12, and then hopefully we have this all in place so that when we hit the ground running next year, we'll have a new and improved program that we'll be pretty confident in and that we'll continue to monitor, though, to see where we need to adjust. So before I hand the mic over to Veronica, is there any questions in relation to what I presented so far? All right, you want to talk to the money person. So.
That's because money's so exciting. We know you're dying for the financial part of this. So when we're looking at our finances at school, there's really 2 important things that we need to know. And one is, are we spending more money than what we're bringing in? And then the second thing you really want to know is, with the money you have, how long can that last you if you don't get any more revenue? Like all of a sudden we don't get any money, how long could we operate the school? So the first slide here shows the last few years, and I see it's a little bit dim, but it starts with year 2013 and it goes through 2018. And if you look at where that arrow is, back in 2015 and 2016, we were definitely spending more money than what we were bringing in. In 2016, it was close to $3 million that we had spent more than what we had brought in. Around that point in time, we said, hey, we obviously can't continue to do this. So we took a really long look at what we were spending our money on and what we could do to make some changes. But our most important focus during that time was we didn't want to touch anything that was really going to hurt our students academically. So we went through, made sure we were right staffed, made sure that we, were doing the best we could with our maintenance process, with our non-academic budget. So we made some cuts. We had some other things that happened that ended up being pretty good for us that probably we didn't have to make cuts. We had hoped to cut that deficit spending in half between 16 and 17, but we were able to actually flip that in a year, which a lot of it was our hard work, but some of it was just some luck of the draw. So through fiscal year 18, which was last year, we did have more revenues than we had expenses. So we're trying to maintain not having a deficit spending, and I think this year we're going to be just about even spending, so we should be still on track for that. The other measure that you have then is, how much money how long could you last if you got no more revenue based on what you spend? And the reason you look at your finances like this is if I tell you we have, let's say, $12 million in cash at the end of the year, you think, well, why didn't you spend that? Well, you don't spend it because you have to have some reserves. So the guidance on that for school districts is never get below 60 days of money on hand. You need to have that money in case an emergency happens, a boiler breaks or whatever. You want to have some money in reserve. Well, back in years 16 and year 16, we had fallen below 60 days. So that was our fight to get our cash days back up. And in 2019, this year, we hope to be back keep it even. So we're at about 73 cash days right now. And that's a real comfortable number to be at. You really, once you get down close to 60 is when you start getting nervous and think we've got to, make sure we right the ship and make sure that we're not going to be overspending, and because that's a terrible situation to be in, because, in a school district, almost all of our costs are people, and you really don't want to start having to look at affecting people, staffing and, laying people off and all that. So we're trying to monitor this all the time to make sure we're not in a situation like that. So I'm going to give you the top 3 revenue sources that we have and the most expenses that we spend money on. So the number 1 place where we get money at Marion City Schools is from the state. Almost 77% of our money comes from the state. That's $45.5 million. This money is based on the number of kids that we have, what their economic situation is. It's also based on our preschool, and there's a little bit of casino money in there, and our transportation. So almost all of our revenue, 77% is a lot, and we're heavily state dependent. That's really important in a year like this year going into next, because this is a budget year. So we really don't know what our budget's going to be next year until almost the end of June. So every 2 years, the state does a new budget, and that's when they kind of tell you this is what you're going to get. In fiscal years 16 and 17, our state revenues increased almost 7% a year during those years, so we're having a pretty nice cash increase each year. The last 2 fiscal years, it was capped at about 3%. So we were still getting some extra money from the state, but not at the rate we had gotten previously. So that was another adjustment that we had to make. And then again, this is the last year, the fiscal year, or of their budget, so next year will be a new budget cycle. The next largest category of money that we get is from local taxes, which is almost $10 million, or 17% of our budget. That's the money we get from the residents, plus all the business taxpayers in the district. Of that money we get, 72% comes from residents, and the rest comes from businesses. And if you're a taxpayer in the district, you're going to pay just about 27 mils towards our operating money, and another 3.5 for the buildings that we built, and there was a half a mil that went with that to maintain the buildings. That goes away, I think, in about 2022, so we're getting close to paying off all the buildings. And then the third revenue source we have goes back to what Ron was saying earlier. 4% of our money comes from students that are open enrolling into the district. That's $2.2 million. And with each one of those students that come in, we get a minimum of $6,020 per student. We have 362 students right now that we're getting funded for that come from other districts into Marion City Schools. So the top 5 expenses that we have, obviously, number 1 is our salaries for our employees. That's 49% of our budget, and this is just salaries. That's $29.2 million. We employ 645 employees at Marion City Schools. There are 374 teachers, 228 non-teaching, and 43 administrators and supervisors, and those are regular employees. We have a ton of subs and other people that come to the district, but we have 645 people that we employ on a daily basis. In Marion City Schools, we have 2 unions. We have a teaching union. That contract is up this year, and we'll be negotiating that. And then next year, we'll be negotiating our non-teaching union. 14% of our expenses come from students that leave the district. That's $8.4 million. That's students who leave on open enrollment and going to community schools. So each one of those students cost us a minimum of $6,020 who leave, and it's different depending on where they go and what they're doing. But we currently have almost 1,300, a little over 1,300 kids who decide to get educated elsewhere. So that includes your community schools and your open enrollment. And that is a huge portion of our budget. 10% of our expenses are medical insurance. That's just about $6 million. Marion City Schools is a self-funded insurance policy, so that means we just put our money in a pot, and as our employees have medical expenses, it gets paid out of that pot. Actually, at the beginning or towards the end of last school year or last calendar year, we were faced with almost a 19% increase. But we also have an insurance committee that meets, and it's made up of members from both union and administrators. And we were able to look at our expenses and work together to make some changes in our plan that made our increase in medical insurance only 10% instead of 19%. And that was a huge savings for the district. And I think that's really important when you look at the fact that our cash days should stay the same this year as last year, because otherwise we were going to have a fairly good decrease in our cash balance because of our medical insurance increase. 8% of our money goes to the retirement system, which is just under $5 million. And if you don't work in a school, the law in Ohio says that if you do work in a school, you have to belong to a state retirement system. Teachers belong to STRS, and non-teaching employees belong to SERS. So instead of the board paying their share into Social Security, they pay 14% of the teacher's pay into STRS and 10% of the non-teaching employees into SERS. That makes up 8% of our budget. And then our last big expense is utilities. That's about 2% of our budget. Marion City Schools currently has 9 buildings that it maintains. Our electricity is $750,000, water's $160,000, fuel's $145,000, internet's $50,000. And really, if you divide that up per building, it's not so bad. But when you look at it as a whole, it's about 2% of our budget. This is just saying, hey, how do we compare to other districts on what we spend per child? Marion City Schools spends just under $9,000 per student on operating money, and that's compared to a state average of almost $9,300. So we're a little bit lower in our spending per student. Our classroom instruction, so that's basically your teachers, your supplies, your books. Marion City's at $6,247, and the state average is $6,300, so we're about $100 less than that. But our non-classroom spending, which is really your administration, your supervisors, your maintenance, Marion City spends $2,700, and the state average is $3,000. So if you look at the little chart there, our district is on the top, and the state average is on the bottom. We're fairly comparable to the rest of the state in our spending. So at least when you look at this, it's not like, oh my gosh, we're way out of whack, not spending enough or spending too much. And then finally, the last thing that's really important in our school district is we do get quite a bit of money from other sources. Our food service operation brings in over $3 million a year. All of our students eat lunches for free. So we get subsidized by the federal government. We also have what we call entitlement grants. Those are title money, like if you ever heard of Title I. We get over $4 million in funds from the federal government for that. And then this past year, we had competitive grants, which are grants that we have grant writers in-house that write grants, and we were awarded over $800,000 last year. And this year, are in the process of applying for well over $1 million in grants. And those let us supply extra services to our kids. Probably one that many of you may have heard of is Century 21 grants. We've received them in the past. We had a transition grant that was applied for, but those are all written specifically for our district for a specific purpose, and we kind of compete with other districts to get that money. So all in all, our general fund gets just under $60 million, and then we get almost another $20 million from other sources. So our budget is just about $79 million to run Marion City Schools. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Veronica. So at this time, that pretty much concludes the presentation, so we can open up to any questions, either to myself or Veronica. Be more than happy to answer any questions. Yes?
This is probably more general. Teresa Lipke with the YMCA, and you probably can't give a specific answer, but how can we as community organizations and residents of Marion help you as you're trying to make improvements?
It's a great question. So the question is, how can the community and residents of Marion City Schools help us improve? And I'll go back to that strategic planning process that we're going to have in place, and we're going to be asking for members of the community, whether you're in an organization, a support organization in the community, or whether you're a parent, teacher, staff member, there's something for everybody to be involved in that strategic planning. whether it's, whatever your passion is. If it's literacy and you want to be involved in having conversations about, how do we get the message out to the community that literacy is a priority in this district. And so once we establish, after tonight, we will start to work on establishing a core committee, and then we'll do kind of a hub and spoke type of thing. That core committee will then branch out into the pillars, and so we'll be asking folks to help serve on those committees to come up with action plans and measurable goals that involve all the stakeholders. Okay. Thanks. Yes, sir. So we have probably a lot more folks that are in Marion City Schools than community folks that are in attendance tonight. I think that was what we're talking about. And so that's another part of the message is that, and we're working on, we have to work on our message too, to make sure that, we get out to the community what our message is, how much community involvement we want in the decision-making process. And so we definitely have to take a look at how we do that so that we can increase the numbers of folks either, and we're trying to do some things through social media and all those kinds of things, but we have to do a better job in the district of communicating our message. So thank you for that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, and I hate to say that. I mean, a lot of times it depends. And as kids get older in the district, you see less and less parent involvement. I mean, our elementary buildings, you go to parent-teacher conferences, I mean, there's a line out the door, especially for the first conference, and then it kind of tapers off a little bit. But, I think districts as a whole are seeing less and less because, parents are working more, they're, struggling to find the time to be able to do that. But, and again, we need to help our community engage in their children's education, but we can't solely rely on that either. I mean, we know what our situation is in Marion and the lack of parental involvement that we have, and our educational program has to be kind of tailored to the idea that, some of those things are still going to be beyond our control. So, yes?
I guess my question revolves around, what are we gonna do? Obviously, it sounds like you're starting to develop a plan, you wanna streamline stuff, communicate, but what are we doing to actually help the teachers? Like, to me, I feel our teachers are already spread so thin and in so many different ways, and I'm a parent, I'm not an educator, but they do so much for us already. How are you going to implement even more things? Like, what are you taking away? How can you keep them focused without limiting them even more with their time? Plus they have, my daughter has 29 students in her class.
Right.
So I guess that's what I'm most concerned about.
And unfortunately, some of these test scores and those kinds of things, aren't really reflective of how hard our staff works. Because they do. I mean, our teachers and our staff members, our administrators are, working their tails off every day to provide, what they need to provide for our students. But, so as part of this literacy committee, and I'll just use that as an example. So getting our teachers in a room together and representative of the different grade levels and different buildings across the district to have conversations about, what are you seeing in your classroom? What supports do you need? What are we not providing you in relation and relative to professional development or resources, books, whatever it might be necessary to help you do your job within the classroom. And so, having those part of the conversations and what we've gathered, and I can tell you, even just through, our conversations with K through 2 literacy, for example, we know that and our teachers are telling us, where there's areas of, that they, maybe there could be a weakness that we could devote more resources to and how that goes. So having those conversations about what they need, I'll go back to the Ohio improvement process as well, and we're trying to use that process to really help support people. That process was meant to be driven by teachers. So the most important part of that process is what's called teacher-based teams. So every building within the district has an opportunity for grade level teachers to get together to have discussions. And then they kind of report to what's called a building level team. So, there's representatives from each grade level that meet together as a building. And then we have a district leadership team. So the idea is the communication should come from teachers to the buildings up to the district level so that we can make decisions about how we can support teachers better. That process has been in place for a while, but we've not really used it the way it was meant to. We hope, and my hope is that gives us a better understanding. I mean, I could be out in every building every day in classrooms, but I'm still not fully aware of what the needs are on a regular basis. So we have to develop that way of two-way communication so that our staff members can communicate to us. And we found through having some of these conversations too, I mean, and when it comes to literacy, I mean, some of our teachers have kind of gone and really, you know, they're working hard and they're trying to improve the literacy achievement within their classrooms. And so they've gone out and used some different strategies, and what we found is, you know, we're kind of all over the place in relation to what we do. So the effort to help streamline that, and maybe if we're more precise about what we're doing, then maybe we can take some of those things off of our teachers' table too. But that, I mean, that's an excellent comment. We need to figure that piece out. I mean, we need to be able to provide more support for our staff. You know, part of the reason is, again, when you talk about your child being in a classroom with 29, that's not acceptable anymore. We can't continue, we could never do that again. And so we need steps in place to make sure that that doesn't happen, so we don't put our teachers in that spot. Yeah, go ahead.
So with all that being said, what are we doing? Because I do not think that, you know, the scores and tests and things that are done are indicative of our school system. I know how hard our teachers work and how great they are. So what are we doing in order to increase morale and make sure that we're keeping teachers that we have and not going elsewhere and the morale isn't tanking, as
Right.
well as what are we doing? Are there I'm sure there are tests out there that can actually give us more of an indication of a holistic type outcome that our students are having and not so test driven. Are we looking at doing any of that so
Yep.
that our teachers can have real feedback instead of just feedback based on
Right.
test scores?
So, you know, it's obvious that, you know, pardon me? So I think the question is, again, what are we doing to, I'm sorry, I just read.
What are we doing to be proactive to keep morale up for the teachers?
It has to do with morale of the teachers. What are we doing to keep teachers, keep morale up, those kinds of things?
If there's anything else that we're doing that
Right.
is not going to be test-based results,
Right.
and there's other ways that we can get data based on our students that is more indicative of what our teachers are doing,
Right.
not just test-based.
So it's no secret in this district that we have a lot of students that come with us with some form of trauma. It's a trauma-impacted youth school district. So we have elements that exist within our district, and high poverty and crime and some of those other kinds of things that, you know, carry over to our students, and so they bring a lot of those issues to the table. And I think if you talk to some of our teachers, some of their biggest struggles right now are how to address the needs of our students that are bringing all of these different, behaviors and issues with them to the table. So while they're trying to teach kids how to read, they also have to be able to address the social emotional needs of our students as well. And I think that's, part of the issue of what our teachers face every day, and, why they have to go home exhausted in dealing and trying to manage those kinds of things. So what we're doing as a part of that, hopefully within our strategic plan, is to address some of those non-academic barriers to success, so that our teachers can have better strategies to deal with some of those, making sure that we have wraparound services in our district to provide some of that social emotional support with them as well. But and Jamie is sitting here as the president of our teachers union, in my mind, having conversations on a regular basis and making sure we communicate what the issues are back and forth between the administration and the teachers, so that we understand, so that we can be on the same page, because this is a team effort. The associations that exist in this district have to be able to work with the administration. The administration has to be able to work with the association and the teachers and have conversations to be able to build that relationship so that we can support each other. And that's, again, somebody asked me the other day, how do you change culture? Well, I can't change culture. We will change the culture in this district when we get to a point where we understand, the communication piece exists between us, and we trust each other, that we're trying to do what's in the best interest of staff, and staff's trying to do what's in the best interest of kids, and so on and so forth. So when we build that relationship, and then I think we can work on really having conversations about how to change the culture. Yeah, so that's another piece of the, again, so, because you may have seen the pillar, one of the pillars was leader in me. But we took a look at, yeah, we're going to do, so leadership is about, again, addressing the social emotional needs of our students and developing some character education that meets their needs and, kind of gives those students some strategies on how to handle certain situations. And, we all know Leader in Me has really had a profound effect on Harrison, and now Hayes is kind of taken on some of that. At the middle school here, too, they've implemented some of those strategies. So we're not going to take that away from anybody. But what we know is that it's important for this district to have a character education program that works. But that's going to be a grassroots effort that's going to come out of our buildings. So they're going to determine, what meets their needs the best. We want to give them some flexibility to be able to do that. So Leader in Me is not going away, and if our buildings, if that's the part of what they need for their culture in that building, they're certainly going to be able to do that.
And I've been a social worker in the community for 15 years, and I see the amount of poverty and
Mm-hmm.
some of the issues that these families, and it's no reflection upon the teachers and people in this room today. To me, it has to be starting at preschool level, exposing them to
Right.
education early on, getting as much before they even get there, because a lot of these children are coming to school with no outside source of information fed to them, and they're learning how to
Right.
because even the use of computers in testing, as we discussed before, is a huge part of that, is learning how to use a computer. When children come in with no computer skills and have to sit down and take a test where they can't be guided by a teacher, that's going to be a huge
Right.
reflection in their test scores.
And thank you for saying that. I don't know if we were talking about, the test scores as being reflective of really what's happening in the district. So again, I'll go back and make two comments in relation to that. At the state level, obviously, we have an accountability system, and it's based on our local report card. And a large part of that local report card is about test scores. Probably 90% of the local report card is somehow related to, some student performance level within that. So if you took, and, the state has given each district a letter grade, and then there's a performance index which measures how many kids score at the proficient level, how many kids score at the basic level, and it comes up with an index score. And so the state has rank ordered school districts in relation to their performance index. So what many people have done is you take those the rank order of school districts of where they're at from districts that receive an A all the way down from districts that receive an F, and you put the economics, the social economic piece next to those report cards and rank order them. There's obviously a correlation between high wealth districts and the achievement as opposed to low wealth districts and where they're at. So again, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that, for one thing, we can't expect here in Marion to have the same educational program as they do in, I don't know, Upper Arlington, maybe? Because, again, not that our kids can't learn. That's not an excuse, because they can learn, they can do that. But if we think we're going to have the same educational program in place that maybe a more affluent district does, we're not talking apples to apples there. Because we're not talking about some of the trauma-impacted youth that come into Marion and how our teachers have to handle that situation as opposed to other districts. So I don't believe that this is the end-all, be-all in relation to our local report card. But again, people use these measures to make decisions sometimes. Do they want to move to Marion? Well, let's take a look at their local report card. Do they want to send their kids elsewhere to maybe another school district that has a higher rating? So unfortunately, that's what is used to evaluate us. So we have to continue. But if we believe, for example, that more than 50% of our students should read at grade level, and if that information is accurate and that's what it tells us, then we have to continue to address what we're doing in the classroom to improve that. So even though that's where we're at, I think it's our responsibility to continue to look at how we improve that. Yes, Jamie?
As a parent, I'm involved in
Yeah.
surveys that ask parents why they're bringing their kids into our district, or even an exit survey they send out to kids that are not staying in our district.
I actually think on our application, we have a question on there that talks about why or where, yeah, I don't know if we've had that in the past. I'm looking at Ms. Lawson. We do? Right. And I think, we probably need to do a little bit more with some surveying. We have the ability to get contact information for those students that leave us. We have to probably put together a survey that says, really why are you leaving, Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you. Anything else? No? All right, well, we've taken up about an hour and 10 minutes of your time, so I appreciate you coming out tonight. I know that this will be videotaped and it'll be up on our Facebook page at some point in time, so if you want to, if you have an extra hour and 10 minutes and you want to rewatch the State of the Schools address, feel free to. But in the meantime, if you do have a question or a comment, or you'd like to talk to me or any one of our staff in person, phone call, whatever, feel free to reach me by email, call the office, see me before you go. I'd be more than happy to set up a time where we can sit down one-on-one and have conversations. Okay? So thank you again for attending tonight. Good night.